Okay, now let's try to understand what is passed by value versus what is passed by reference, right? So these are basically two ways of giving values to a function, right? I hope you guys understand what functions do, right? Basically, let's say we need to do certain task, we can create functions for it inside the C program and then use those functions for whatever we need, right? And there are two ways of passing the values to those functions. One is I can pass by value, and the second way is I can pass by the reference. Let's try to understand what is the difference between both of them, right? So one is in pass by value, the function receives the copy of the variable. The changes inside the function don't affect the original value. So what happens is that when you pass by value, right, when you pass in the value of a particular variable, actually a copy of it, the variable gets created, and then changes are being made to that copy of the variable, right? So what happens is the original value doesn't really get affected. So I've given this code snippet over here. Let's try to understand what's exactly happening. I've created this very simple function which basically just adds a value of 10 to the variable, right? Whatever is being passed to it. So first thing is I declare this value a, right? I pass this value to this function a, right? So now what's going to happen is when I call the add 10a, it's going to go to this function over here, but it's going to create a copy of this variable and store it in int x over here. So we would have something like int x equal 5. But remember, the difference is that this is actually a copy of this variable, right? Int x equal 5 would actually be a copy. So I create this variable int x equal 5 and then I add the value x equal 10, right? So this would mean x would be equal to 15 over here. But if you think about it, after that, once I call this function, it's going to end, and then I'm printing %d comma a. So I want you guys to pause the video and try to understand what exactly would be printed. Would it be 15 or would it be 5? Okay, so the answer to this question would be this is actually going to, it's going to print 5, right? I hope that makes sense. Why? Because in this case, I pass in the value a, copy of it gets created, int x equal 5, and then we are adding 10 to the value x over here and not a, right? A, the original a that we created in the main, is going to stay same. It's going to still stay 5, right? So I hope pass by value makes sense to you guys. Now let's try to understand what is pass by reference, right? So function receives the address of the variable, changes affect the original value. So in this case, what's happening is instead of actually passing the variable, we are actually passing the address to that variable, right? So let's say I create this a, right? Let's try to understand this code snippet. First thing is I declare this integer a equal 5. So in some memory in my computer, this variable a equal 5 will be created, right? And let's say the address is 0x6000 for now, right? So some value a equal 5 would be created, or I should say it's simply like the value 5 would be stored at this particular memory address. Now if you look at this part over here, right, there's a specific difference between both of these code snippets. In this case, I'm actually passing the address of a to the function, but in this case I was just passing the value, right? So I hope that basically makes sense. Now when I pass in the value of address a, meaning it's actually going to pass it actually passes the value 0x6000 or whatever the address is to the function, right? So now when we call the add 10, it's going to go to this function. Now let's take a look at that. That there's another difference between both of these code snippets, right? Over here, I had int x as my argument, and over here I have int star x, right? Why? Because since I'm passing the address over here, that's why it has been declared as a pointer over here, right? So I hope you guys understand this, right? But how do we declare a pointer? We declare it as int star x equal, let's say, address of a, and same thing is happening in this case as well. Since I'm passing an address, I need to get in the argument declaration, I need to declare it as a pointer, right? So what's going to happen is this pointer is actually going to be set up as x equal 0x6000. X is the pointer over here. And now if you look at this code snippet, this is another difference between both of these code lines, right? in this case, I do star x plus equal 10. I hope that makes sense, which basically means get me the value which is stored at this particular address and then add the 10 to it. So what's going to happen is this x is going to go to this address, it's going to add 10 to this value, and it's going to change it. Right? So the new value in this case would be equal to 15. Right? Once it adds the value, this function ends and it's going to return back to the main. So once again, I want you guys to pause the video and try to figure out what will be printed by this printf function. Okay, so I hope you're able to figure it out. This example over here is actually going to print 15. Right? Why? Because instead of actually passing the value in this example, we passed the address of the value we created, right? And the value, this function received the pointer, it got the address, it dereferenced it and added the value 10 to it, right? So let's just do a quick summary of what's happening. Functions, we can pass them variables in two ways. We can pass by reference or we can pass by value, right? When we pass by value, a copy of that variable gets created and no changes are made to the original variable. But when we pass by reference, the address is passed and actual changes are being made to the original variable that gets created, right? So in this case, no changes get made to the variable a, but in this case, changes are being made to the variable a, right? Now let's move on to the next topic.